Welcome back, everyone. I'm Tony, and this is the Hard4Games channel. Today, thanks to have a Game Boy Advance prototype / development system to showcase to all of you. I've sometimes seen this thing online referred to as the Game Boy Advance TS2 board, and frankly, this thing is the strangest looking development system we've had here on the show. It looks like David Cronenberg was commissioned to make a Game Boy Advance. It is just a strange hodgepodge of Game Boy stuff put on a board, and that is basically what it is. It's very bizarre looking. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So a great source of information on this is actually on IGN. They covered a version of this prototype back in August of 2000. They covered the board and even showcased the Yoshi Story demo that was running on it. So yes, developers were treated to a conversion of the N64 title to showcase what the Game Boy Advance could do. I'll go ahead and put a link to that article in the description below. It is fairly good, although I will say that the staff over at IGN was somewhat, we'll say, generous when it comes to describing the quality of the Game Boy Advance screen, because they were like, well, you know, it's really reflective and we can't really get a good photo of it and it's not backlit, but oh, you gotta see it in person. It's so vibrant. Here it is. Let's go ahead and take a tour. Obviously, right here we have the screen. We have our cartridge input over here, our speaker and sort of sound setup over here, volume dial. To be so gentle with this, it's very, it just feels very delicate. The whole thing feels very delicate. Our headphone input right here. I'm assuming this is some sort of PC interface for development. Power input, power button, power indicator light, Game Boy Advance link cable connector right here. And probably the most strange out of all of this is the buttons are just included right here. Up, down, left, right, select start, BA, L, and R. And we also have an external option for controller as well. So it's obviously it's a modified Super Famicom controller. The connector has been modified to be able to just plug right in here and play. So interesting note here is that this system is actually not backwards compatible. Here's what happens when we attempt to play a regular Game Boy game. Now let's go ahead and try a Game Boy Color game. My guess is that this thing was supposed to have some sort of a switch or button or toggle or something like that that would allow you to switch between Game Boy Advance mode and a mode that would allow you to play the Game Boy predecessor systems, you know, Game Boy, Game Boy Color. As you can see here, you have CGB and then an arrow back and forth, AGB. So you have Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance. The assumption is something would have been put here, but alas, there is nothing there. So as it stands, this unit can only play Game Boy Advance titles. So how does it play? Well, you know, it's strange. You know, first off, and probably most obvious, you don't want to apply too much pressure on this thing because you're playing on a circuit board, an expensive, ultra rare, one of a kind circuit board. So you have to be careful, and obviously, you know, you can't wrap your hands around this thing like you would a Game Boy Advance, right? So you're kind of poking at it like you would poke at an extremely priceless keyboard or something to that effect. Now, lastly, your L and R buttons are not over-the-top triggers. They're buttons that are right above the B and A, which that's also a little bit strange. But that's where the external SNES controller comes into play. I hooked it up and it did work great. Although when using this thing, I must admit, when I was playing Mario World, it was really tough because I kept defaulting, at least in my mind, to SNES controls. Because it's an SNES game with a Super Nintendo controller, but it's not. It's a Game Boy Advance game. So anyways, I kept dying, but aside from that, this worked great. So regarding compatibility, I hadn't noticed any issues, at least initially. I did watch a video on YouTube where a gentleman showcased a couple of titles that had some graphical oddities and glitches. So I decided to test one of the titles that he had tested, which was Mario Kart Super Circuit. And as it turns out, there are some graphical issues with this particular title on the dev unit. So that about wraps up the Game Boy Advance prototype / development system / TS2 board. I appreciate all of you watching, and of course I really appreciate sending this my way and letting me showcase it. I'm gonna go ahead and put a link to his Twitter in the description below, and you all should check it out because he's constantly showcasing extremely rare items. If you like development stuff and if you just like rare video game stuff in general, check out his Twitter. There is a ton of it. And otherwise, we'll see you all next time.